I really wanted to take a bit of a different tack and talk about the future of Drupal, because that's where I spend a lot of my time worrying obsessively, and position to you some of the challenges that we're facing, and then how there's opportunities for all of you. So first, I'll extend that excellent introduction from Susan. I do a lot of fun things. I really try to focus on keeping things fun. I think it's a really critical part of creating a culture around an organization. And so when I met Dries, one of the first things I did was I sat down and we did a little bit of strategizing, but then I took him to a bar and poured flaming Zambuca shots in his mouth, and to make myself memorable, and that's worked out really well. And so since then, I've thrown a number of parties that have been a lot of fun. I threw DrupalCon Boston, which was the first big DrupalCon with 850 people. And while I was sane enough not to try to run a DrupalCon again, I did have a lot of ideas and put together an architecture for DrupalCon San Francisco, and the outstanding San Francisco team, and with the help of the Drupal Association, actually went ahead and implemented it. I do a lot of adventure travel. My name on Drupal.org, my handle on Drupal.org is Amazon, and the reason it's Amazon is because when I was 18 years old, I kept having this dream about mountain biking in the Amazon, and I was struggling in school, and so I had a conversation with my mom, and she said, if you could do anything in the world right now, what'd you do? And I said, I guess I'd grab my bike and go mountain bike in the Amazon. So about 5 days later, I booked my ticket and grabbed my bicycle, and my mom thought I was going to be fine, but everybody else thought I was going to be dead, and mountain bike across Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, and then ultimately grabbed a boat and paddled through down into the Amazon. And when I got back, I thought it was really cool, and then there was this new thing called the web, and so I went to go register Amazon.com. And when my roommate found out that I was getting $75 for domain registration at the time, he was like, dude, that's 3 cases of beer, you're absolutely insane. There's no way you're getting Amazon.com. And so I drank the 3 cases of beer, and I'm several $billion less rich because of it. But I'm still trying to have some fun. So I travel a lot, and I was just looking at my calendar on the way over this morning, and I was thinking, great, I'm really looking forward to a mellow, nice, quiet January, because in November I did 6 different cities in 24 days, and that included Thanksgiving. And then I looked at my calendar today, and so I'll be in 7 different cities talking about Drupal this month alone. So I'm out there, I'm having fun, and I'm really excited to be here. I also focus a lot on getting stuff done, and I think Susan covered a bunch of it, but among the things that I work on are helping to coordinate the Drupal security team, working on infrastructure, doing a lot of fundraising, and another project that's going to be instrumental in a lot of what I talk around 7 is quality assurance and getting qa.drupal.org so we test every patch and can accelerate core development. And so if you don't know me or haven't heard of me, and that's probably by intention, I really try to use what I call small L leadership, where I try to focus on just doing actions and then having people follow by getting a lot of stuff done. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about at the end of how you can help and get stuff done within the Drupal community. So I'll talk about Drupal 7 being ready today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges we're facing for Drupal 8. I'll talk about some of the challenges around Drupal 7 and why it took so long, some of the problems that we've got in the community and how we have to address them. And then I'm going to talk about this new concept that I want all of you to really learn and be getting prepared to evangelize, called One Drupal to Rule Them All. And then I'll talk a little bit about how you can play a role in the Drupal project and really make it the most important thing on your resume. So first of all, wow, Drupal 7 finally came out. I mean, wow, just an incredible accomplishment. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, go to drupal.org/7 and see this wonderful product announcement pitch on a page, and it's been translated or is in the process of being translated into 37 languages, so people around the world can see that. And we saw that last night. And all through yesterday, we had parties in 97 countries, 323 different parties. It's just incredible. I spent the last month working and trying to get that going, and I was really hoping we'd break 100 parties. And so I've just been kind of walking around with a big grin for the last week or so. But there are at least three other sessions on Drupal 7 today, and there's DrupalCon Chicago coming up, and I hope all of you, if you're able to get to either see the sessions today or go to Chicago, you'll get to learn a lot more from experts in Drupal 7. But I did want to cover a concept because this was a big issue around Drupal 6, and there'll be a lot of discussion right now. Should my business or should I start using Drupal 7? And so I wanted to give you some examples of how Drupal is ready. So Examiner.com is probably the largest Drupal site in the world. Certainly, it has 65,000 content editors. So if you find yourself talking to somebody at a big company and they say, hey, can it handle more than a few users? let them know, 65,000 content editors on examiner.com, 50 million to 80 million page views a month, depending on the month, and it's growing, that's where they're heading. Most of the pages are dynamically delivered, and it's built on a great new back end. They started building November of 2009, so they started 15 months before Drupal 7 shipped. And so, great team, probably the #1 contributor to Drupal 7 right there. A lot of really critical strategic work. NPR has a lot of websites, a lot of stations, a lot of radio shows, Chicago Public Media, This American Life. Just go on if you're an NPR fan like I am. All of those shows have not only great content on them, but we can go to the website and then we can follow up and interact with them. And they've made the decision that they're going to move most of their websites to Drupal 7. And so they've been in the process for the last several months, probably the last 8 months or so, building their new platform on Drupal 7. On Wednesday, the day the Drupal 7 release, they announced their first 3 sites. And this is one of them. Okay, and so we'll see hundreds to 1,000 sites potentially roll out on NPR's new Drupal 7 platform. So it is ready to go. It's out there. A lot of people are using it. And then if you can't see, I'm sorry, but that's a picture of the U.S. Congress, the House, House and the Senate. And they launched 90 different sites on Wednesday, okay, for all the new freshmen. And so they're going to be rolling. So when you calculate the total number of members of the House and the total number of members of the Senate and then all their subcommittees and things like that, we're going to see hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 sites potentially over time of rolling out on their brand new Drupal 7 platform. So if you're worried about going to Drupal 7, the best radio station and the best Congress money can buy is all using Drupal. And if they can't agree on anything, the one thing they can agree on is Drupal, okay? I know, government's overreaching. People should be able to use WordPress if they want, but no, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about why Drupal 7 took so long. So if you're new to Drupal, this will maybe be a little bit technical for you, and if you're an experienced core developer, then this is going to be kind of rudimentary because you've been living it for the last 3 years. But let's just get a feel for a second. How many people here actually were one of the 1,000 people who were listed as a contributor to Drupal 7? Okay, great. Could you stand up? Thanks. Stand up. Thank you. They did a phenomenal job working together, but there were some reasons why it took 3 years to get out there. One of the deals that Dries had made with the community was that if you write a lot of tests, then that means that the QA process will be a lot easier. We won't have to rely on a dozen people or so who are absolute masters of every single screen and will click through over and over and over again to make sure that everything's working. So we wrote these 30,000 tests over the last 3 years, and that's allowed Drupal to accelerate. And when we add something new, even before it gets to these guys here, these core developers here in the audience, before they review it, there's a green flag on their patch that basically says, hey, it's already passed 30,000 tests, 31,700 as of last night. And so this has made a huge difference, but writing those tests took a really long time. The second thing was when Drupal 6 released, it released in February of 2009, but it really didn't start to get wide adoption until Views came out in September, October of 2008, I think. And so we learned from that lesson. So the #1 contributor is a guy named not #1, but user number 12, a guy named Moshe Weitzman, basically stepped forward and said, we really need to have a movement, right? We need to have a movement to make sure that when Drupal 7 releases, we have all the contributed modules. So has anybody here ported their contributed module to Drupal 7? No one? Jen, I know you're there. Jen, there's Jen. Okay, there. Hi, guys. So, what we launched with yesterday was about 880 of the Drupal 7,000 Drupal modules were available in one form or another, one stage release or another for Drupal 8 and for Drupal 7. So that was a huge, huge moment. What that meant, though, was that a lot of people who maybe would have been putting their time into working on core and getting it out so fast were trying to keep up with this broader ecosystem, and so they were putting time into getting their contributed modules there. Okay, and so that slowed us down a bit. The second thing was, the fourth thing, was that if you really, really were passionate about using Drupal 7 this time around, for the first time in a long time, or first time ever, you actually could get a full-time job working on Drupal 7. So if you're passionate and you're coding away and you're a top Drupal contributor and you want to get Drupal 7 out so you can start using it for your clients, you can just quit your job and go get a job with one of the other companies that's already using Drupal 7. You can take a job at examiner.com. You could go to Acquia and work on Drupal Gardens. You could go to The House. You could go to NPR. You could go to SubHub Lite. You could go to one of many companies that are building their platform a year in advance, so you could go out and start working on Drupal 7. And it's not that you didn't continue to contribute, but that was just an incredible opportunity for you to go and take advantage of the latest technology, so you weren't kind of held back if you really wanted to work on these great features that you'd got in. And I'll come back and talk about that enough. In Drupal 4.6 and 4.7, back when I got involved in the security team, there were really some fundamental things that we hadn't got right in Drupal 7 yet, in Drupal security APIs at that time. And so what we found ourselves was running around, chasing all over Drupal core, looking for, is this pattern of code here? Oh, that could be insecure. Or is this pattern of code in contributed modules? Oh, that could be insecure. And so the security team was putting a huge amount of pressure on the core team, saying, listen, we can't keep fixing these bugs at this rate. We've really got to get it out there. So we forced 4.6 out. We really pushed hard to get 4.7 out. And what we found with Drupal 6 was that the security was actually pretty good. And with the 30 plus different security modules that you can use to enhance Drupal 6, it was secure enough, so there wasn't a lot of pressure from the Drupal security team to get Drupal 7 out. Okay. And then one of the other issues is that in Drupal, within each release, because the web is changing and what people expect from their site and what people expect from contributed modules is changing so fast, we find ourselves constantly having to break the APIs. But the rule is while we'll break your APIs, we'll preserve your data. And so what that means is that you can't really roll a release of Drupal out unless you've got an upgrade path. Okay? And there weren't a lot of people working on the upgrade path of how to get from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7 all the way through. And because it took a lot of time to work on that, people sort of said, well, maybe I'll just wait till the APIs are a little more solid. And so we got into this sort of circle of dependencies around, do we keep changing the APIs? Do we keep working on the upgrade path? Who's going to do that? And this is really important. I'll talk about this in Drupal 8. And so that kind of held us back because we didn't really get to a beta until about August of this year when we had a solid upgrade path coming out of Copenhagen. This was another big issue. What we found is when we got to Copenhagen, we figured, okay, sometimes Europeans don't want to fly to the US, and sometimes developers in the US don't want to fly to Europe. It's expensive, taking a week off, personal and family time. But what we found was we got there, and we had a lot of the core developers in a room, and we really wanted to hash out discussions, and then they weren't there, right? People were having babies, they were getting married, they had deadlines for their jobs, they had a project that wasn't paying, so they had to keep working to keeping cash flow going. For whatever reason, some of the most critical core developers were not there for the critical conversations that needed to happen in person. So we've come up with a plan, and like many of these things, we're working on solving them. So at DrupalCon Chicago, Crowley, Tiffany Ferris, Crowley's the famous CHX, Tiffany Ferris is one of the people who run DrupalCon Chicago, and myself have put together a list of many of the top core developers. And what we've done is we've taken the funding that we were normally putting that was only applying to sponsorship candidates, and we're making sure that if there is a financial reason that core developers can't make it, so we're going to use the profits from the sponsors and your ticket sales to make sure that the handful of core developers who we really need to be there at Chicago are there, and so they'll participate in something called core conversations to help accelerate architecture decisions and build those social working bonds together so that core will come out faster. Okay, so I've given you an overview of some of the problems and some of the challenges that we face, and I hope you found that to be interesting from an understanding of how Drupal core actually gets developed. So we're presented now with a bunch of challenges for Drupal 8. I know some of you are probably just got your Drupal 6 site up and are shocked to be finding out, hoping to learn something about Drupal 7, and now you're learning about Drupal 8, but hey, let's keep going. So there was this effort in Drupal 8, or in Drupal 7 called D7 UX. And we fixed a lot of those things. We got a new overlay in so you didn't lose your place when you were wanted to just change something on your site, either content or configuration. You didn't have to memorize the secret path to go change something on your site. You click on that little gear and it would pop up and you could edit directly, called editing in place. That was really important. We had a new dashboard so that you had a home place that was configurable. You could put all your favorite things. We added a bookmark on the top and configurable navigation menu on the top so you could quickly navigate to what you wanted, and that helped a lot. And this diagram is a little bit hard to see, so I'll just explain it to you. What this is basically a flow of the most experienced Drupal users on the far right and the least experienced Drupal users on the left. So on the left, in the top left corner, there's basically a view of what a Drupal site should look like if you're looking at your own site. And in there, it's basically saying, here's the section where my blog pages are, here's the section where my event pages are, here's the part of my site that's community, here's the part of my site that's news, right? Because that's what somebody who's coming with a model of, I have web pages, please assemble them in an order, just like a bunch of sticky pads. That's how they think of content management coming through, and that's the way they want to view Drupal. And so we don't have that yet. What we do have, and what we started to have, is the thing in the middle, which is kind of here's some pages and some layouts, and this part is a block, and this part is some other things. And we've kind of got an intermediate, and we've done a couple of things to make that work. We've got something called features now, which allow people to sort of configure features, and so they can group functionality together. And so that's sort of that middle. And then we've also got some stuff like Drupal Gardens that's going out and redesigning the UI for views and web form and some additional modules for that. And so that's starting to make things a little bit easier. And then on the right is really where we are with Drupal. And does anybody know how many pages, admin pages, there are in Drupal 7? Well, I haven't had the chance to sit down and count the final number, but I know it was around 75. And so that's a lot of pages to memorize, to configure. And then, so for a lot of new users, having to only see that experience on the far right of having to memorize where everything is to change stuff is really overwhelming and leads to a lot of people really struggling to learn Drupal and come up. And so we've really got to spend time trying to get that model of structure. How do I structure what my site looks like in Drupal 8? And we'll see some interesting stuff in contrib modules coming forward. The second big problem is as we see more and more organizations are really struggling with this challenge. I have a development site, I've got a staging site where my design team and my content team and my developer all have to come together, and I have to QA and see what that looks like, and then I've got to move my content into my production site. That workflow now has a series of best practices, and based on your business's needs and rules and requirements, we've got ways to teach you how to do that, but it's not first class, right? And that's really what we're going to need to fix in Drupal 8, is we've got to solve this release management issue. And it's just as important for folks on the high end, the enterprises that are running hundreds of sites and are throwing teams every week or every 2 weeks at releasing, putting out a new site, as it is for people who are just running one site and just want to kind of do a good engineering workflow through there. So that one person running one server can really step through and make sure that their site's going to end up being what they want. I know a lot of you right now are probably thinking, when do I upgrade to Drupal 7? When is it going to be ready? And what's that process? And how do I not blow up my site in that process? And you probably want something like this release management workflow to make sure that if you do that upgrade, you're going to have some rails on there so you don't fall off. This is an interesting concept about development, and this comes back to that thing I talked about before. In Drupal, we break your APIs, but we preserve your data. What happened was the Examiner team started off in November of 2009 building on Drupal 7 because there were so many tests at the time, 15, 20,000 tests at the time. They said, hey, this is stable enough that let's go to 7. There's so many advantages in 7, we'll just go right there. But what that meant was as they were writing code on that new code base, they kept having to change because all the APIs were changing. So they had to do what's called a head-to-head, right? Head-to-head migration. And so this is a UI for what it's like to go through and do a head-to-head migration. And a number of teams were doing this. Now, this is really important because remember, come back to that thing where we had a long delay because we didn't have an upgrade path. We were changing all the UIs and then, oh, we'll get to the upgrade later. We'll get to the upgrade data later. We have to do it. We'll eventually get to it. Somebody will do it, right? So this is a big question for 8. Should we do head-to-head upgrades? And I'll tell you why this matters. If you go and look at a company like Yahoo today and you look at a website like Upcoming, they're doing 30 code releases and pushes per day. Have you ever seen A/B testing? Anybody familiar with A/B testing? Yeah? Okay, so A/B testing is about pushing different changes from a UI perspective, but the point is, or you've been on Google and you see something crazy on Google and you're like, when did they add this? Well, they're pushing code all the time, and so there's a new paradigm of constantly releasing code. But at Drupal, we've got this big 3-year-long cycle where we write code and waterfall it and test it and QA it, and then it comes out. Maybe what we should be moving towards is instantaneous, everyday upgrades, pushing new code out and moving the data up and stuff like that, because that's what seems to be the hot thing in engineering practices, especially for these cloud-based services. And so maybe that's what we're going to have to try to solve and take a hard look at for Drupal 8. And what that means is if your boss comes to you and says, I want a feature, go write that feature for Drupal 8, and you can upgrade your data, then you can write that feature today and use it next month. And you can stay there. You don't have to wait 3 years. And this is one of the biggest complaints from core developers is I work on something, but I got to wait 3 years or 2 years to use it. And so this could really speed up potentially Drupal development. So Drupal's almost 10 years old, and so because of it's 10 years old, we got a lot of things right, particularly back at the beginning, this notion of a central abstract content for Drupal content. When Dries was a college student in his dorm, he was thinking about these abstract concepts. He would go on and get his PhD in computer science. And so he thought that way, and that worked really well for us. And this idea of pluggable architectures and pluggable features into Drupal is really critical for our growth. And they got the notion of open standards and supporting open web standards early in, aggregation and user concepts and profiles and XML and HTTP 1 and 1.1 and those kinds of things. But for all the goodness that is Drupal and all the power that we're able to use, the reality is that there's large chunks of Drupal that are kind of legacy. They're crufty. Nobody really knows how to maintain them anymore. They were written a long time ago. The original taxonomy in Drupal was written for a porn website. And it's time to go back and take a look at some of that stuff. Some of it was rewritten for taxonomy for Field API, but we've got to go back and be willing to sort of tear down parts of Drupal that are maybe unpopular or aren't well known so that they make sense and they're consistent. Many of the APIs in Drupal, there's 5 different ways to do it depending whether you're at the theming layer or you're configuring something, you're writing custom modules, or you're extending a popular contributed module. There's just different ways to do it, and we need more consistency, because if we get more consistency, people will look at Drupal and say, it's not only is it incredibly productive, incredibly useful, but it's elegant from an architecture standpoint, because we're going to have a lot more criticism geared at us as we get more and more popular about the quality of our architecture, and the people who are learning to program against that are going to expect high quality APIs. Okay. And then, we've got to really talk about what is critical. So in the past, what did critical mean? Well, critical used to mean that, and it's just to help you understand, we don't release Drupal 7. We didn't release Drupal 7 until we got down to 0 criticals. Okay? So the people who decide that are criticals are all these core developers who are working on it, and so the definition of what a critical bug was is really dependent on the person who people are going to fix it and really understand that space. So we're waiting on them to constantly look and say this is critical. Now, critical used to mean the UI was clearly broken because we didn't have automated testing to make sure that everything was consistent. So if we regressed, critical, it's broken. If it broke the data or destroyed the data, broken. If it didn't work at all, okay, really broken. Maybe sometimes if it didn't work at all, that was okay if nobody really knew about it. We shipped Drupal 6 and for 3 months nobody knew that actions didn't work because we didn't have tests, right? I mean, we have 50,000 websites out there and nobody's, one of the most popular new features, and nobody has revealed to us that it's broken. People just said, oh, I guess that thing doesn't work. It'll eventually get there. So those are the things that used to be critical. Now we're facing things where it's well, hypothetically in the field, in the file stream handler, we could do this on Amazon Web Services with S3, and in that case of usage, it doesn't quite work. So now that's critical, right? Because it's so stable, people are reaching out and looking for more and more edge cases about how they think Drupal should work, and therefore they're filing that as a critical bug. And so we're going to have to take a hard look, because that means that we're now spending 16 months, 18 months looking at these long lists of criticals that maybe aren't so critical, but they're critical to the people who are going to do the work. So it is critical in some ways. And so we're going to have to come back and look at some of those definitions. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about Drupal 7 being ready. I talked about the challenges and why it got there. I've talked a little bit about what are the challenges we're facing for Drupal 8. Now I want to sort of talk to you who aren't contributed core developers or contributed module developers. What are the big challenges that we face in the community? So the number one thing is training. Okay, how many people here have tried to hire a Drupal developer in the last year? Okay. How many people have placed an ad that says no telecommute in my office and received more than 150 responses from somebody from a foreign country? Okay? We are in negative unemployment in Drupal. And while that's great because it kind of bumps all our salaries up, or bumps, keeps our ecosystem going, at the same time, it means it's slowing our growth. And that's a huge, huge problem. So if your company or your organization is building websites today, I want you to take a really hard look at the total ecosystem of what you're doing, because you really need to be not only delivering sites, but you need to be training people who are going to take over those sites. You need to be running training as part of your business, partially as lead generation, partially because if you don't train enough people and it doesn't keep growing, it's going to slow down. And that means all that investment that you're putting in Drupal just isn't going to get there. So we've really got to focus on training and getting more and more Drupalers out there so that when people want to go hire somebody, they don't wait 6 months to hire somebody local and then have to be client number 17 for somebody across the country when they're trying to launch a site. We also need a more balanced ecosystem. Now, what I will say is that because of the nature of Drupal and because of Dries' leadership in being fair and equitable, and really believing that there should be an open and fair marketplace, the Drupal project has evolved in a very fair ecosystem, right? There's no one company that dominates. If you look at Drupal 7 development, there's, out of the top 20 core developers, they probably work for 15 different companies, right? There's no one shop that has anything like a % of the total global business in Drupal or something like that. So we've got a fairly balanced ecosystem, but the one thing that we aren't so balanced is we're very technical heavy. Most of the people in the Drupal community are fairly technical, and certainly the people with a lot of clout who can change it are really developers. And so we've really got to take a hard look at some of our competitors, and we've got to take a hard look at what people who build websites in general look like when they're building websites. And so when we look at WordPress is often one-person shops, a light designer, maybe a content editor, very small teams. And I think in that standpoint, we're much better off. Drupal shops in general are much better off at project management and much more capable of running larger projects. And so for that, we deserve a big pat on the back. And we've got a lot of great CEOs in the Drupal community. When we look at the Joomla community is kind of fragmented. They've got a lot of people who do good modules or features or extension development, and that's pretty healthy, but they don't build a lot of big sites. And so we're better balanced in there. But when you compare Drupal to the way websites are developed for organizations, like go look at Qualcomm and maybe take a look at what the structure of their other web development teams look like and compare that to the way Drupal sites are developed. Maybe we're not as balanced with the project management, or not as balanced with the design. I don't know anything about Qualcomm. I just know that they're here. Go look at other organizations that have internal web teams and look at how they make up those teams and what that looks like. Go look at a web design agency, the top web design agencies in the country or in the world, and see what's the makeup of those teams. More creative teams, more content teams, higher level project management, great financial control so that the margins on those projects are healthy, can pay for healthcare for their employees, can allow for room for projects to fail and to have R&D and things like that. We've really got to look and make sure that we've got that balance in the community. And so the subtext of that message is, if you're a project manager, we're going to work really hard to raise you to a first-class citizen in the Drupal community. If you're a designer, you're already on your way to being a first-class citizen. If you're a UI or user experience expert, we need to raise you to a thing. If you're a CFO or a financial person in the Drupal community, we need to raise you up to be a first-class citizen in the Drupal community and have you be rock stars, not just the killer developers. We also need to change that experience, and I addressed that a little bit before about what does it mean to do it. How many people have got a business and tried to get listed on Drupal.org for their company and failed? Everybody else, you guys know on the Drupal services page, there's a Drupal services page, and you got to go up there, and basically to get listed on that page, you basically have to have contributed to Drupal.org, and you got to have somebody on your staff who's contributed some core patches. And really, if you're like the most amazing Drupal development shop and you're just killing it with clients and you invest heavily in your local community and you're building showcase sites and your company's doing contributed modules, you don't get listed necessarily, right? And that's very frustrating, because what that means is when people come to Drupal.org and they want to come and work on they want to find a company that's going to help them out, because they haven't contributed directly in those ways to Drupal.org, they don't necessarily find your company. And so we're working on, and over the next 3 months, we're going to be deploying this new marketplace on Drupal. And we'll have many more companies listed. But more importantly, we'll have them pay to some extent for feature listing, which will fund infrastructure development by being members of the Drupal Association and this new thing we're working on called an annual membership for the Drupal Association. And we're also going to require the companies to list showcases, case studies of the sites they've worked on. So when somebody goes to Drupal.org and they look and say, who's Bob32 on Drupal.org? Is he a good developer? Well, what they're going to look at is case study 1 and case study 2 of a story of success that the client has signed off on, that they actually did a good job. And that'll make it easier for people who are trying to hire folks to know that the firm they're dealing with or the developer they're dealing with is got quality, and make it easier for them to choose. And that'll make us just a little more professional. We still have to be scrappy. We still got to be a lot of fun. We still got to do all our crazy stuff. But we've got to put just a little bit more gleam and a little bit more polish on the site so that it's easier for people to find the professional services that'll put the money into the ecosystem and fund us. So what's the plan? I've gone over Drupal 7's ready, gone over why it's challenging and all the things we can fix. I've gone over the challenges for Drupal 8. I've laid out the challenges for the community, for you, folks like yourselves. So what's the plan? Drupal world domination, always been the plan, okay? Always the plan. So when we look at the web today, 500 million websites, Content grew 67% last year, phenomenal. One of the 4 industries in the United States that's growing at a rapid clip. We're lucky to have fallen into this world, when everybody else is suffering so much hardship. But we see with that growth, still 76% of the web doesn't use a content management system. And in fact, 13.3% of them are using WordPress, which is really a blogging platform that's now migrating to that. And worst off, they've got 55.5% of the market share. And what does that mean when they've got that much market share? It means that even though they don't have the features today, even though they don't have the rich community, even though they don't have the great shops and the great executive leadership that we've got in the Drupal community, in comparison, they've got market momentum, and they'll continue to invest. And if you look how fast they've come in the last 18 months, they've really got something going in their ability to catch up. So we're going to have to execute really well. But it's still mostly small sites, and they still don't have the big shops. They still don't have the big projects. And in Joomla, they've got a great little ecosystem, and for small sites, they're doing really well, and they've got 11% market share. And then there's Drupal at 1.4, but a really important 1.4% of the web, probably more like 1.8 today, and about 6% market share. And so we've got a lot of work to do to get to Drupal world domination. And there's some things that we can do to do that. It's always really important to have a plan. So in 2005, in August 2005, I met Dries, and we sat down on a couch just outside our little uncarpeted booth in the back right corner of the cheapest, slowest, smallest open source booth at OzCon. And we sat down and we laid out a plan for what to do. And we worked on it for many years, about 5 years we worked on that plan, about maybe 4 years at the time. And it involved doing things like making sure Drupal was secure and making sure Drupal.org was up and making sure that we built healthy companies and a wide variety of companies. And then, the magic moment happened. Recovery.gov, a new administration came in, new fresh blood, and they put up a new website, recovery.gov, and it was in Drupal. Wow. The US government was using Drupal. Amazing. So I started trying to find out who they were, right? Nothing. Couldn't get anything. Finally got some back channel communication to them, but they were only involved in recovery.gov. We couldn't really reach anybody who was making decisions in the administration. So I started dialing, right? I started calling people in the campaign. Zach, gave me some insight into his Democratic connections so I could find out who some of the designers were from the campaign. I got some messages passed. I called the designer's guy's wife at 10 o'clock at night and begged her to pass a message on to her husband who knew a guy to get our contact information to somebody at the White House to get us in there. And so at DrupalCon, we show up, DrupalCon DC, we show up and I pass the message, we're gonna be in DC. We're gonna be there. Please come to DrupalCon. Please come to DrupalCon. We'll give you a free pass. We'll give you a tour. If you want a speaking opportunity, we'll give you a speaking opportunity. Whatever you want, just come. Nothing. Radio silence. Okay. Second day at DrupalCon, I get the call. Hi, this is Dave from the White House. We're unable to make it to DrupalCon. Would you be willing to come over? Let me see. Where's my calendar? Yeah, I think I can make it. Yeah. So we grab Dries and we run off to the White House. And of course, who do we send to the White House? High security, last minute meeting, nothing's planned. We send a Canadian and a Belgian. So I show up and without my passport, but I think I had my green card and was able to get through. And before the meeting, we sat down and we really looked at all the problems and studied all the problems, very similar to the problems that I've been going over for the last little while here. And we made a plan and we said, what are we going to talk about when it comes to security? What are we going to talk about when it comes to enterprise integration? What are we going to talk about when it comes to authentication? How are we going to address scalability? We laid out a plan like this and we wrote it all down on a cocktail napkin and we went in and we killed it for 2 hours. Okay? And then radio silence. And then a couple months later, we got the call. We'd like you to come back and talk to us some more about Drupal. We're starting to get it. And then finally, we got the call. Can't tell you who we are. We're from a large government agency. We're interested in finding some people who know how to do Drupal. Yes, they're going to do it. They're going to use Drupal. And so we're under radio silence for a long time. And then in November of 2009, boom, White House launches. We lost Recovery, but I'll take the White House over Recovery. Recovery went to SharePoint. And so in November 2008, we had one site, recovery.gov. Then we had we lost one site, we gained one site, White House. Within the next year, we had 50 more federal sites go to Drupal. And when we launched on Wednesday, we had 90 more sites. We're probably about 170, 180 sites. And as we we're going to see 1,000 sites go in the federal space. And so because we had a plan about how to address and tackle the government space and get Drupal there, we're on our way. And not only have we succeeded in the US, but we now have 82 national governments worldwide which have Drupal sites for some of their national sites. So this is really on our way. So how do we go and take what we've done and that plan and that ability to identify our problems and put a plan and execute them? How do we take that to the rest of the world? Well, this is what the rest of the world looks like today. Really broken content management, really broken websites, a bunch of different technologies, some .NET, some Windows, some Apache, some PHP, some Ruby, some forums, some bulletin boards, some custom code, a little bit of everything. Yep, Tomcat, it's all there. So if there's one slide that I want you to walk away from, it's this slide. I want you to really know and get this. And I don't know if you can see, I guess that's coming through the dark. Can you read that? I can't with the lights. Okay, so the first one is corporate sites. Tell me if I get it wrong. And the next one, so people can launch their main corporate site, and we're starting to see more organizations launch their main corporate site with Drupal. And then they're going to have some product sites. For every product that company puts out, they do some product sites. And then they're going to have a bunch of quick marketing sites that they're going to put out, right? They do a partnership, or the company decides to raise money and participate in breast cancer awareness for a month. They need to put out a quick site to say that that company's doing a volunteer effort, and they're all going to do a walk or something like that, or they're going to announce a quick partnership with somebody, and they put that site out. And then they've got some, is that a community site? Is that what those ones are? So then they've got some community sites, and they want community sites for two reasons. The marketing department is spending a ton of money on Twitter, they're spending a ton of money on Facebook, they're spending a ton of money on LinkedIn and buying all these social media ads, and people are talking about their companies out there, but they're not talking about their companies back at their companies. So they've got to put out a community site that looks and mimics like the social activity that people are doing this social stuff, so they've got a place to go. And so they do this community site. The second thing they're doing is that they're realizing that companies like Semantic.com, Semantic/Connect, is getting huge ROI by having a community site that supports each other. Sound familiar? About 500,000 of us getting online, working on a website, answering each other's questions, working together, solving problems. These companies are starting to realize that's a lot cheaper than outsourcing it to a foreign country, right? Getting smart people on your website solving each other's problems, it's much, much faster. Just give them the tools to do it and they'll solve each other's problems. And so they're doing that, they're adding these community sites. I can't see, what type of sites are those? Other sites, okay, and so there's all kinds of other sites. So they've got those sites on the outside, and then they've got some sites on the inside. And so they've got intranets, collaborative intranets like Open Atrium or Drupal Commons, and they're trying to run that. And they've got all kinds of department sites. So if you're at a university today, if you go to any of the big universities, what we're starting to see is a couple hundred, 200, 300, 400, 500 sites, one for every class, one for every department, just rolling out site after site after site. And so what do we have? We have only one solution that can do it all. Drupal can do all of it, right? It's not the perfect niche player in every single case, but if you're an organization and you're looking at how much money you're going to spend across everything, Drupal can do all of this, and that means you could build one team that can do all of this. And so this is what I want you to take away, is that this is where the future of Drupal is going, as Drupal as a platform. And this kind of investment is why we could see NPR launch on the day that Drupal 7 is released. This is why we could see Examiner launch multiple Drupal sites before Drupal 7 was launched. This is why we see Congress be able to launch multiple sites, because they took this platform approach to using Drupal. So who's going to help sell this? Well, that's why I'm talking to you. We really need trusted Drupal advisors, people who understand the business of things, but also get Drupal. They also understand what's going to do. And so this is a guy named Darren. Darren used to be, or is in the Drupal Sacramento users group, and he works for a $16 billion a year company called HealthNet. And what HealthNet does is they build big Java enterprise applications, and it's all maintained by IBM, and every project is unbelievably expensive. Except Darren goes to the regular Drupal meetups, and he keeps using Drupal on the side, and every day he goes into the office and he tells his boss, hey, we could build this in Java from scratch, but I can build this in Drupal in a week or a few hours. And he just kept slowly, persistently wearing them down. I understand the business. I understand. We could use this with Drupal. We could do this with Drupal. And so eventually, they get to the point where they said, hey, we're going to do an evaluation of our content management system. Could we get somebody from the Drupal community to come in and talk to us? And so now I came in, worked with Darren, and then they launched this incredibly successful Drupal project that saves them a ton of money. And so now they're looking at it and going, wow, open source is really fast. It's really good. It's about a quarter in time in delivery, and about 1/4 the cost as well to be able to deploy stuff on Drupal. And that's the kind of things that I'm looking for all of you to be able to do to take that. So the last thing I want to say to you is that there's this great book, well, I don't know if it's a great book, but it was a fun book, by a guy named Tom Peters, a management guru. And he wrote this book called The Project 50. There's a whole series of them. And I want you to think about what you're going to be doing for the next 5 years and 10 years. We're all sort of sitting out here looking at this tough economy and thankful that we've got work when we've got 10 but realistically 20% unemployment in a growing emergent market. And we're looking at our resumes and say, am I getting old? Do I have the skills? Am I going to be around for a while? And when we're looking at that, thinking in the back of our heads, I want you to think that it's not the company that you're working at today. It's not the title of your vice president or a director. At the end of the day, people are going to remember you and are going to hire you because of the projects you worked on, okay? And if you want to be happy, you want to work at a project that doesn't just give you benefits and doesn't just give you a check. You want to work on a project where people have gratitude that you worked on it. They want to be thankful to you. You need people to thank you for working on stuff. And that's why Drupal is in many ways the best company. Best thing you'll ever have on your resume, because Drupal is going to be a phenomenal success. And if you become part of the Drupal project and work on it, you'll have a lot of people thanking you. You'll get opportunities like this to stand up and get that applause, and it'll actually make you happy working on that project. And so I want you to think about what role can you play in the Drupal project. Now, some of you might be saying, I'm not a core developer, I'm not a boy genius, I'm not a girl genius, I can't do this stuff. But the reality is a lot of the simple stuff is really approachable. Sometimes it's documentation. It can be organizing events like this. It can be organizing the 323 parties that we threw yesterday. Put Drupal on your resume. Become an active member of the community. Elevate yourself. Find a role. It's just regular people who are just helping out a few hours a month that are really making a difference and really taking Drupal to the next level. And getting that on your resume, it will give you connections, will help you build up the social credibility that people will want to work with you and hire you and give you opportunities and share their insight and wisdom. Drupal will be the best thing you do in your career. So please join the Drupal project, get involved, and help us out. Thanks very much.